Good evening. Welcome to tonight's More Than Monoliths artist conversation between Cameron Gray and Des Moines muralist Jill Wells, who we'll introduce a little later. I'm Susan Gent, and I work at the Iowa State University and Ames Public Libraries. Tonight, I'm representing APL, whose mission is to connect you to the world of ideas through diverse and inclusive resources and programs. We welcome program proposals, so please contact me or our staff if you have any ideas you'd like to explore. As part of understanding Jill as an artist, we will be scrolling photos of her work during the conversation between her and Cam. Now, they won't necessarily be talking about each picture as it is showing. Buxton Initiative is a wide-ranging collaborative effort which promotes the beauty of Blackness, offering opportunities to learn, celebrate, preserve, and embrace the Black experience. By creating Black spaces, in tonight's case virtually, the Buxton Initiative gives voice to Black stories. So we'll post the link to the site and chat throughout the event, so you can follow the Buxton Initiative on Instagram or view Jill's art. So we'll keep you connected throughout the evening with lots of important links. And do support the Buxton Initiative. It's going to continue to grow and really flourish. So Cameron, there you are. I'm going to hand it off to Cam and talk to you later.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Gray, as she said, and I'm excited to bring to you a good friend of mine, Jill Wells. I first came in contact with Jill's work during the outrage. We both got selected to be a part of a showing of Black artists during Outrage to Change that was formed by the Octagon in June of 2020, following the death of George Floyd. And I remember coming across her work and just being taken aback and being reminded of the paintings that I used to see in my grandmother's house that used to flourish her walls. And not only did it bring me back to understanding and remembering what the beauty of Black art was, but it just brought me back into that feeling of seeing and the beauty of the Black experience, but then also the hardship of that experience too as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to all of you, Jill Wells.
Thanks, Cam. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to see your face. What's going on?
So much. I'm doing well. Like, today has been a good day. For the record, I did get a free pizza today. So if that was not a good omen about this whole situation that we are dealing with right now, I don't know what was. And so
yes.
I don't know. I'm really excited to have you here, and to have you a part of this thing, and honestly to be the beginning of it, because I really admire your work and I admire your social practice as well. So before we even begin to really dive deep into your work and like your current work and what you're doing now, can you please give us a little background about where you're from and how it all started?
So I'm from Indianola, Iowa. I was born in Des Moines, but grew up in Indianola. And I say a lot of what I focus on now started from those experiences. And we have a little bit of a common thread with both of our grandmothers in art. And that inspiration I can really relate to, because I think I tell this story often because it's something I'm so proud of and so grateful for. But my grandmother, she's still a practicing artist to this day. She's a watercolor primarily artist. And I always remember thinking that would be something I could take to rather easily, because I watched her for so long use that medium. but to this day, I still struggle with watercolor. I love that medium. And she would take me when I was young, like 7 years old, to this like studio basement where it was like these women who would commune and like fellowship together and create. And I can still like in my head see the space. And it's where I fell in love with oils because a lot of the women painted with traditional oils. And like the smell, I fell in love with that smell. And I have like this nostalgia connected to it. And I remember there'd be like their spots, their easels, they'd have their whole little setup and they would leave everything right where it was. And then they would come back and it's right where it was, or is. And my space to this day is, I feel like that. Like I have my easel, I've got my oils, and I leave everything there for long periods of time, sometimes too long. Like I'll rot brushes, like I'm notorious for killing brushes. I'll just leave them in water for like weeks. Some of them, they'll just dry out, like the water will evaporate and then they're all crusty and I have to go buy new brushes. I'm horrible.
Mhm.
But really my understanding and education started with my grandmother in that space with her friends. Mhm.
Oh no, that's truly beautiful. So I will clarify. My grandmother wasn't an artist, but you know like how in when you go into very black grandmother spaces or your grandma's house, they usually have those stereotypical like the what does she have up in a dining room? It was like the like a line of people going into the church house, if you will. And so like it was these type of images that I saw within your work that I thought was really, that brought me back to that place, which I thought was really interesting to show that connection to that. So going back to that, how do you see your connection to your own blackness within your work? Like, and how does that coalesce within the work itself?
How do I see myself within that? It's kind of the thoughts, I think, most than the visual, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So, the images, there's things like that I have painted that I've never actually done. Um, so for instance, like I've never actually stepped foot onto a cotton field,
Hmm.
or a cotton plantation. I've been on a sugarcane plantation. I've never picked cotton. So I I don't see myself necessarily like in a very literal sense, but I see myself historically, um, through the, I guess, through the lens of the ancestors and
For sure.
people who came before me, who paved the way,
Hmm.
for me to be able to live the life that I live today in all its fullness. So I think that's what gets me so excited when I venture into like new studies, new literature, new information, and tackle um, things that I feel like I want to try to move forward, if that makes sense also.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean it's, and that's kind of what I was meaning by the images in which I saw for the first time. And actually, funny enough, it was in the Ames Public Library that I saw, like when we walked by and I saw those pieces, were those the ones in the cotton fields. And but then like even like the way you painted them reminded me of those portraits and those drawing and those paintings that I would see in my grandmother's house. And so no, I love that exploration of uh, showing, the historical nature of blackness and showing those scenes, because those scenes need to be seen and need to be painted and need to be acknowledged. Um, so like when you're thinking about your work right now and where it is right now, how do you see that? Like, do you feel like you're going to be leaning more into that particular realm again, trying to bring back those historical images, or do you see yourself drifting away from that? Like, where do you see your work going, or how do you see it playing out?
I see it going, um, honestly, both ways.
Okay.
Um, there's something about old, like black and white photographs that I'm very drawn to. Um, there's something about images from the past that I do like to continually, from time to time, um, put back into um, view, because not ever, like, one, our attention spans, I think, just are short, period, right? So
For
if
sure.
I'm trying to communicate something, um, like, I only have so much brain capacity myself to be able to keep the information. So I know that, we as human beings are like that. So repetition is how we can really drive something into long term. And then I know how I think about things as well. I kind of like to marinate, or sometimes I'll just, psychoanalyze something, for the sake of really trying to make sure I'm being as open-minded as possible, or seeing it from as many perspectives as possible. So, and that way I could loop back to, old paintings, and see myself, trying to articulate them visually in a different way.
Hmm.
Um, but also right now, color, and when you talked about color, that's always been something that I found to be very, very powerful. Um, so playing around with the palettes and maybe muting them down, um, I could see myself going in that way as well. But it really it's dictated on my mood and like what the piece calls for.
For sure.
So I'm, visually, from that perspective, you can really tap into the emotional side. And I think that's what color often does. But then when you can get textural as well, then you can really tap into the psyche and emotions. So that's something that's been on the forefront as of recently. So I finished that mural for DRI, which I know you and I have talked about, and I've talked
Hmm.
about with the other members in our community. I really felt like I truly found a kind of like an open door with that. And not only having the opportunity to create one of the, a piece that, like, to this day, like, I'm very, very proud of. It's like one of my proudest, like, kind of crowning achievements, that when I think about my legacy, um, I'm happy that however long that's going to be around, that it's there.
Hmm.
But that like educational piece of learning how to really, for me, feel like I could be successful in visual and tactile, that's where I really see my work starting to go. So I'm
Yeah.
playing around with different Braille texts right now, and on top of those, and like layering those, and then trying to educate myself more on how to make them archival.
Hmm.
Um, and so that, and also safe COVID.
For
That's
sure.
one thing that I'm like, very, very cognizant of, in that, how can you create a piece where people can touch it, it's gonna last, but they also feel safe doing that. So that's the part that I think I need to, um, I think, probably reach out to some experts and learn from them on that.
No, that's truly beautiful. Before we go into talking more about that mural, because I do want to really talk about how in your own practice you talk a lot about mental health and disabilities within that work, and then I'm also really curious about how that it also blends that into Blackness too, because I think always though Black disabled people aren't still pushing to the forefront, if you will, when we talk about disabilities and stuff to that degree within the Black community in our own
Right.
spaces too. Um, but one thing I wanted to touch on before we even get past that was before we get to that is this notion of trauma, because I feel like when you're drawing when you're painting these particular images and you almost leave yourself susceptible to almost reliving said traumas, that because you have to research, you have to, look at these images too as well. So I'm curious to hear about your own process about when you have to go there. How do you get yourself out of those moments? Because I feel like a lot of
Mm,
Black artists are doing similar things, of where they're talking about very traumatizing images or using very traumatized images to make their work. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people who are don't know how to get out of it. So I'm curious what you would say to them about how to manage those feelings and
mhm,
how to separate yourself if you need to.
mhm. I would say first and foremost, um, to kind of jump a little ahead into the question, I'm usually one of the first people that'll ask someone like, "Hey, are you seeing a therapist? Are you talking with anyone? Do you want to talk with someone? Are you seeing a counselor? Um, what are your therapeutic practices?" So when people have something like vicarious trauma, um, or like direct traumatic event occur within their life, um, I have to sometimes slow myself down that I don't, like overwhelm the person. Because if someone tells me about it, like my very
Sure.
first usually like thought is that, and then I'm like, ooh, like I want to say it, and I've caught myself sometimes feeling very uncouth like that. You should have just like waited a little hot minute before you said that.
Okay.
Um, and a lot of that also comes from me being a counselor. I think I was drawn to counseling, one, from my own substance use and recovery process, from my own mental health, um, that was tied directly to that. My mother is a mental health nurse, so I grew up with her. And I just was kind of always, I think, influenced by people who were in that field, but not necessarily having some of the difficult conversations.
Mm.
And especially when it came to like the African American side of my family, and you know the history and the knowledge of the trauma of um, you know any of my ancestors, or others. Just like there were just uncomfortable conversations within our family that for whatever reason they weren't had.
Mm.
So fast forward to when I might be speaking with someone who I feel like you might need to have that difficult conversation to break through whatever is holding you back from this traumatic event. I think that might be another reason why I'm so quick to be like, are you talking with someone? Like, do you have someone? You know what I mean? Because I have all that, like those schemas connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so with my work, and when I think about mental health, some of the stigmas within the African American community connected to that. I mean, there's real reasons why we know what some of those are, but for each individual, they're going to be different. So we don't know what each individual's reasons might be.
For sure.
Um, and so when I think about my practice with art, and I think about being impacted not only from addressing certain things within my practice, but also just in life, sometimes art is my absolute go-to therapy tool, but sometimes I can't even,
Mm-hmm. No.
sometimes
Yeah.
I'm like, it was really bad this week or whatever. And like when I would work with adults in residential recovery, that was probably the most that I can look back and say, like, that was serious vicarious trauma.
Mm.
Because we would have our clients do narratives, life narratives, and we were honored and privileged to have them share them with us as part of their recovery process. And the stories that I have heard throughout my time as a counselor, like I'll never forget them, and so there were honestly long periods of time where I didn't even produce art. And I
Mm.
think that might have been why. Like I would take long breaks. And I'd always talk to myself about like conceptual art, like I'm conceptualizing, but I really think that it was more that I just didn't have um, certain communities in my life. I wasn't talking with certain people. I was trying to just like do everything by myself.
Yeah.
And so it greatly impacted my artwork. I think over the years I've learned and gotten better at some things, but there's still certain times where I'll be honest, Cam, that I like some of the impacts. I literally will just be like, oh, I'm doing, self-care for the next couple weeks and, just kind of vegging out.
Yeah. No,
So it ebbs and flows.
no, it's truly important. And I think for myself, like I remember us even talking about this in between the two of us, because I remember us being on that panel discussion for Outrage to Change of like when when they were asking us to make work, and on the heels of George Floyd and being like, I don't know, like I can't move, like it's hard, I can't move right now, like it's I, this the art is not even on my mind currently. Like I'm trying to heal myself because of this traumatic event, and now you're asking me to produce. It's just it was. I'm only speaking for myself, but I'm sure other people felt this way too, because I remember we talked about on the panel. But like, it was very difficult for us to move. But then the beautiful thing about we were still given that space to do that too as well,
Right.
and to talk through the work itself.
Yeah.
Did you find that therapeutic for yourself as well, like creating the pieces and presenting for Outrage to Change during that traumatic moment for all of us?
Yeah, no, I was thinking about that when I was curious, how long did it take for you to get back to making art?
Man, so when did we get that invitation? Probably like it was like on like right after, if I remember correctly. It wasn't long after he had passed that we got presented that, and we had to have it up by what, July 30th, right? If I
Yeah,
remember correctly.
it's like a super quick turn time.
For sure. And so the difficult part for this, for me, it was like I couldn't think of anything because I was too in, like it was like COVID happened and then this, and it's like it was a lot of frustration built up inside of me, and I couldn't. The last thing on my mind was to produce. The last thing, really, what I was really focused on was trying to build myself up again. Because like and that kind of what led me to making the work that I did make was like I felt like I was numb, like I was feeling so many things within myself that it was that I wasn't feeling anything to some degree. It was almost overwhelming, to say the least. And so when I really sat myself and really contemplated what that feeling was, I knew after that, I knew exactly what I needed to do and how to make it. And that's when the process came. But like, then again, I didn't start install. I still gave myself time to sit with my thoughts, think about it, and stuff to that degree before I even started putting things in that space. And so I was on the later end that most other people had already installed or something to that degree. But, again, understanding what I was going through, I wanted to at least provide myself that time before I actually went to do it, because I knew I just wanted to be okay before I started to really open up those wounds again and start making the work to make what I made for that particular event, if that makes any sense.
And it does. And that numbness, I don't know if people talk about that often. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if
No,
it
for sure.
becomes part of the conversation, and that it's either normalized or we become desensitized to it. And instead of looking at least for me, that it's empowering to like look at that emotion as something that's shouldn't maybe be minimized or normalized, because it's what often does keep people kind of stuck in trauma.
Mhm.
and not able to move forward. So at least if it's identified that, okay, this is something I want to pay attention to, not just kind of, at some point, like you said, because I think that's so important to think about the timing, like for you, like being able to get to that time for you and then start to create a response to what just happened with George
For sure.
Floyd.
Mhm.
And I do know some artists that were, and this is just, I think, how they operate, or maybe this is how they operated to that event, but they just went full force, like right into it.
For sure.
I feel like I was not on the same page with you. And I also had, my son having some really intense questions and conversations.
Mhm.
And I was honestly trying to manage that. And I was trying to manage, like, I don't want him to see this video. I'm not even going to lie. Like, I told him, and I don't know what kind of response this is going to get, but I'm going to put it out there. I did not want him watching because it broke my heart. Like, I had such a hard time. I even get emotional thinking about it now. I like couldn't do it. I don't
Mhm.
try not to cry. Like, I can't watch that. Like, I can't watch this. This is someone's child. They will take their last breath. Like, I was like, son, please don't watch it. Just please. I don't want that. Like, I just, as a mom, that was my parental decision. And I was just trying to
Mhm.
manage that because it was like all over the place. Like,
Yeah.
and that's what I feel like it's so like it needs to be seen and it needs to be out there. And then it's a double-edged sword because then it's like it becomes what do people call that? Clickbait or something?
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah.
And I'm like, let's please not forget this is at one point, this was like a little tiny baby
True. Yeah.
that mom held, just because he's
Mhm.
in this grown man's body doesn't, mean he shouldn't be treated any more precious, like, and it's, that's just how I feel about certain things when I think we get caught up in like the narrative. Oh, well, what did someone do? Like all
Mhm.
that shit, pardon my French, drives me crazy, and it dehumanizes people. And it just, then people respond in ways and like later you're like, oh, hindsight's 2020, whatever. Like people like, oh, I wish I hadn't said that or done that or whatever. I don't know. But that was a big part of that for me. So I didn't create for a while. And then when I did, a whole new body of work started to kind of evolve.
Mm. So talk about that. So like, what was the? So I think there is something really beautiful and transformative that takes place with someone when they actually really start to fight that traumas that they were going through and really starting to instead of running from that traumas, but really going to toe to toe with them to
Mhm.
really dig deep within that to start that healing process. Because I feel like there's a lot of aspects of ourselves that we still have not healed from, that we continue to just keep pushing to the side rather than growing and moving forward. I mean, I've had that same experience too. So I would talk a little bit about that. Like, what what did you see new about this new body of work that wasn't there before?
I specifically did address death and like the resurrection of things like coming back to the surface. So I
Mhm.
think there's a piece that has scrolled through here. It's entitled "And the Spirit Lives On." And that piece, um, I think, was like the second piece that I started playing around with. So it's a collage, and it's got Kathleen Cleaver, and it's also oil on canvas. And I used these floating caskets as kind of like a metaphor um, for when there's too much saturation in the earth of water. It will it can push some, depending on like what type of cemetery it is, and where the casket is, it can actually push the casket up and out of the ground.
Mhm.
Like, so when you think about like flooding, things like that. And so the idea of like all these emotions, like you were saying, all these things that got either pushed to the side or we thought, oh, I'll deal with it later. And it, for me, was a direct response to what is wrong right now
Mhm.
in not just our country, but I think just as part of the human condition. Oftentimes we're like, I need to move forward. And in order to move forward, I can't really deal with the past, or I can't deal with even the right now. I
True.
just need to go forward. And it's
Mhm.
almost an autopilot thing. And then all those things that we're not dealing with, you know what I mean? Eventually they just are going to push something up and out. We're going to see something. And that's really one of the pieces that was like, I felt like I'm ready to have this conversation as a response to, you know, this human being who, I don't even know what to say. Um, but yeah, that was a direct response to that. And the color palette I stayed with was like these dark, dark, dark blues. I've always loved blues and like sapphires, but
Mhm.
I didn't have a conscious like, oh, this is related to anything. But I started looking back on it later. I'm like, oh, I'm in my blue phase.
For sure. I mean, you got a bunch of blue pages behind you right now. I can't hang that
I'm
behind
like,
you.
I'm in my blue period.
No, I love it. No, it's beautiful. Um, no, I exactly what you. I've never even thought about it that way, but that's really beautiful to talk about. Again, like you're saying, like the dead rising again, if you will, or the resurrection of somebody too. Even when the spirit leaves the body, if you will, and the elevation of the spirit, if you will. And that's really beautiful to see that implemented in multiple different ways, because not only are you talking about the spiritual aspect of it, but you're also talking about the physicality of it, like you're saying, like the scientific thing of like when the actual casket is rising, which I thought was really, really, really beautiful. To lighten the mood a little bit, if you will. I didn't mean to get us on like such a damp, but that was even my
I'm
intention.
sorry. Thank
But
you, because
no,
I'll be down the rabbit hole.
no, I think that was really beautiful, because I think that was a lot of things that people need to hear. And I thank you for sharing, because like I mean, and I know that's not hard to relive those moments, but I appreciate what you had to say, and thank you for giving us allowing us to get in your head and see that lens from your point of view. Um, but no, like, okay, so I'm curious. I want people to learn more about this mural work that you've been doing. How did you get into doing murals, and where did that begin? Where's that story start?
Oh, goodness. So I talked about this during TEDx.
Mhm.
Um, so my very first mural I did in 1999. I did it for Creative Visions. And for anyone who doesn't know, it's a human development center in Des Moines on Forest, next to literally, well, like one street over from the Evelyn K. Davis Park. And it's entitled Running Out of Time. My father passed when I was 2 years old. And at that time, the Human Development Center, which is now known as Creative Visions, was like I think it was like a pool hall.
Mm.
And my dad was there with his friends one night. And he ended up trying to break up a fight, and he got shot and he died. Like probably like maybe somewhere out in the parking lot or something like that. I don't, from what my mom told me many years later, I don't think it was inside the building. And so I did not know that. I always knew like
Oh.
how my dad passed, but I never knew where. So like I'm 19, I get my first mural. I'm like loving every minute of it. And I got like my big first check, and like my
Mhm.
grandfather, who's like my dad, like I bought him this huge stuffed tiger, because he just had heart surgery. Like I felt
Mhm.
like really proud of myself. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I fell in love with it. But also when my mom came to see it, she ended up telling me that that's where my father had passed away. And she's like, I didn't think if I told you before, you'd be able to finish the mural.
Mhm.
And so then I really started to think about like, what does that all mean? You know, from a spiritual perspective, um, being a woman of faith and thinking like, and having all these questions and again about like, well, you know, like I just created this work here that's entitled Running Out of Time on the same site where my father passed away. So his time ran out on that site.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm painting images of historical Black men who their time ran out, you know, and now my time is kind of like, what is that? You know, like there was all these, for me, it went much deeper than just, I have my first mural and some paint on this huge wall.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered what that would mean for, you know, other people who are going to step into that site, not knowing the history behind the space, um, but being impacted by what is in the space.
For sure.
And, you know, so all those things culminated, and I just really, I think, wanted to continue with those large scale public works because of all those factors kind of intertwined together.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a while before I did my next mural. I had graduated. And so 2005, I did Blank Park Zoo. And then shortly after, I think it was like 2008 or 9, I did Iowa Lutheran Hospital. It's the mental health adolescent wing. And that one was really impactful also because I like to call them the littles. The littles that were there were just very sweet and very kind, and they taught me a lot without really saying much at all to me. And, you know, to be able to transform that space, you know, anytime I think especially you go into a space and it's really like kind of, you don't get a good like emotional, not Lutheran and what they do there, I don't want that to come off wrong. But the conversation that we had at Lutheran is like, it was very institutional. Like it was like kind of that kind of white creamy walls.
Kind of charged, if you will.
Yeah. And so it's just like,
Yeah.
it wasn't really like, you know, for little ones to be there who are healing from extreme trauma, like they wanted a very welcoming environment that was soothing, you know. So I think anytime you are able to, you know, truly transform a space like that,
Mm-hmm.
it's very empowering. And then trying to think after that, I did a lot of studio work, took a long break, and then did some mural work in between there. But I think maybe to answer the bigger question, if I'm getting this right, Cam, about like public works of art, they're different for, you know, if they're accessible primarily where people can not necessarily have to go inside a building, right? So like,
Yeah, for sure.
and so in that way, you're able to connect with your community. And when we think about art and the power of art in all its form, I think it seeks to not only translate like what is going on in our current world, or
Mm-hmm.
whether that's an internal world like with inside us or external world around us, but I think it also seeks to connect and create connections.
Mm.
And I think that for me, like at the essence, that's what art has always been for me. When I think back to like how I was able to connect at a very young age when I first started doing art, but it also gives us the opportunity to represent, you know, things that are not always represented.
True.
and that's I think one of the like most badass things about being an artist. Like you get to make the decision, like what story am I going to focus on,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so it's you feel like you have some control over some things that sometimes necessarily you feel like are uncontrollables.
No, I love that, and one thing that I love about looking at some of your murals and talking about these, you know, putting it into an institution that is commonly known as being very white, as in and not even talking about particularly white spaces, but in the aspect of color. When you talk about going into these mental institutions, like it's very white walls, blue walls, but it's very muted in the way of these institutional places are. It's like they basically try to bring people in, get the job done, and then send them out, rather than providing a space for them where they feel more comfortable in being in that particular space. And so I love that intervention of your work of bringing those colors and bringing that beauty of art within those spaces. I think that's really beautiful and powerful within that work. One thing that because I think we're starting to get kind of close on time.
Q&A.
I know. And so before we even get into that, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about like what do you see is your next thing that you're working on currently, or where is the work going, and where can we see it possibly, and stuff to that degree.
Mm-hmm. Evelyn K. Davis Center for Working Families. That's my current mural, and it's outdoors. So it's my first public work that is like that, where you can literally just drive by, you could park and enjoy it. And it is located at 1711 7th Street. So in Des Moines. I'll be finished with that, I think, like on Juneteenth.
Okay.
And then I have something in the works, but I have to wait before I can actually disclose it. But I'm really,
yeah,
really kind of chomping at the bit for that one. And then I have Waukee Art Festival that I'll be doing. And so I'm hoping by that time I'm going to kind of slow down and do a little bit more studio work, just to recharge and refocus, because there's some canvas work that I'd really like to do that gets back into that more kind of tactile and it's a little bit more intimate pieces when it comes to size.
For sure. No, no, it's always nice to, get a couple of those commissions, but then I'm sure you've been writing and jotting down thoughts of your own personal thoughts, so that when you do have that time to spend with yourself, you can then go and bring those things into those works. Like you're talking about those more intimate pieces. Because I think we also, when we get really busy, we kind of lose sight of our inner selves, or you're trying to portray things that other people want to see. And so it's always nice to, when you do get afforded that opportunity, when you can get into your own self and like get those things out, it can, again, talking about therapy, it can be very therapeutic for yourself, and getting back to that. So let me see if we have any, let's see if we have any, I think I only see one right now, but I'm also going to look to the chat. But the one question I do see on here says, it's from Julie Russell Stewart. I believe that's how you pronounce that name. And she says, I'm curious about the symbolism in the painting with the clocks, books, and butterflies.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm assuming that she just wants you to talk a little bit more about that work, and possibly give like a little meaning and maybe the title of it.
That one is entitled What We Will Overcome, and it's oil and collage on canvas. That's the first piece that started that new series that we had talked about a little bit, where it was like before The Spirit Lives On came What We Will Overcome. And so the symbolism in there's a book at the very bottom that kind of starts everything off. So it's this foundation of knowledge. And then there's a little sprout that comes up out of the book. And it's kind of like what will grow from like continuing to always learn. There's a stack of books that actually is behind that, and there's a ladder that kind of symbolizes that's like an ever like present thing, at least in my life. Like I don't ever want to stop learning. And I feel like as I got older, I was able to retain information better than I was when I was in high school. I think when I was in high school, I'm like all over the place. Like, don't remember anything. And then there's like a little house, a heart that's an origami heart, a pair of keys. And then there's these butterflies that kind of start at the bottom and come up. And then there's like these little stones that are like the balancing stones. So it starts to kind of bring together all these things, one that was going on in my life at the time. So it's kind of a personal piece, but I think it's also kind of in response to like what was going on in the world around me that was like related to COVID, working from home, and kind of feeling like this buildup of like all this energy around us.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one person in it. So it's kind of like she's a little bit isolated. She's all by herself, but you don't really get the sense that she's truly alone.
Mm.
And I try to do that with light and dark casts. So anytime you see one of my pieces and there's like this heavy contrast between dark and light, it's like my way of representing like the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
And she takes this like leap of faith off of the top of all this jumbled stuff and asks this butterfly basically to carry her. And that's what I kind of did this past year. I quit my job as a counselor, the job that I thought I was going to retire at. And I was like, Lord, I'm just going to take a leap of faith and I'm finally going to do this thing. And, so oftentimes what we think will not be able to carry us is actually more than capable. And so that's why there's those butterflies.
I love that. No, I mean, yeah. Sometimes you gotta take that leap and just ride it to the top, if you will. I mean, you might go down a little bit, but
Like scared, like, oh, shouldn't have done that.
Exactly. But no, but you eventually everything, the cream always rises to the top, and that's something I always keep in my mind, especially during being an artist and trying to live and do what we do. It is a difficult thing because not only are you trying to monetize something, but then it's really taxing on you too, mentally and physically, as you're making the work. One thing I did, is there one more question? I was gonna ask a question because I had here. What time is it? I'm trying to see if I can get my question in too. All right, here we're gonna do this. So this question is asked by a good friend of ours, Jordan Brooks. He says, I know, right? Thank you, Jordan. Appreciate you. Cameron talked about grandma's house. As a creator, exploring brightness and expression, how does it influence the space and images you curate for your son to see himself?
Wow, he would ask some deep, heavy question right now.
I know.
Okay, so I'll be so transparent right now.
Yeah.
My son is 13, and I feel like he and I are going through a phase where, because he is changing so rapidly, I'm actually getting to know who he is right now for the first time in his life, if that makes sense. So he is so much his own person. And it's really hard for me to describe just how smart and articulate, and he's justice oriented. He's very like opinionated in a way that's just open-minded, but he has conviction, and I've just never seen this person from him yet in his life. Like, and I know that that's part of his milestone development. Like, this is where he's supposed to be. And I've talked with him about that. I'm like, I need, there's no rule book for me. So like, I'm trying to really cultivate conversations with him. So for spaces outside of the art world, because he'll come to site with me and hang out, and he's been to all my art shows and opening when he was really little. We'd bring his toys and he'd play. He'll come to the studio with me sometimes. He's a drawer, but I think when I look at like the spaces, it's more conversations. So that's what I'm really working to be with him right now, to really listen and be very curious in an open-minded way and let him be who he is.
Mm.
It's
No, I
important for
love.
me.
No, I think that's beautiful. And even like seeing how you've molded, like there is no beginning or end of your practice and your, being a mother at the same time. That they are one and the same. I think that's something that a lot of people don't see when we talk about uh, artists who are mothers. That the art world sees the artist first and not the mother. It's not one and the same and connected. So to see and to hear you talk about your practice as a combination of both of them, I think that's really beautiful. I think we have time for one more question, and then I'm a little mad. I guess I'll ask my question later. So the last question that we have before we shut it down for the night, it says it's from an anonymous attendee. It says, "What continues to motivate you? Do you experience artist blocks, and if so, how do we work around them?" I know we kind of addressed this earlier, but if you want to elaborate a little bit more, you can.
Yeah. So I'll try to do this really timely because there's one plug I want to get in real quick.
For sure, no, 100%.
I'll experience blocks in a couple ways. One, if I'm trying to render something that is really difficult, say like an expression on a face, I have to take like repeated breaks.
Hmm.
So I'll, be working, trying to get it right. And then I'll be like, my tendency is like, I want to keep going, but I have to tell myself, just go take a 5-minute break and do whatever. So I'll
Yeah.
deal with that kind of block that way. And it usually always helps. I'll step back at whatever I'm looking at. So I'll get it from like out of right in my face, look at it from a distance. That'll help me with any blocks that I'm having too. But if there are periods where I'm just not feeling inspired by anything, and I'm not at all wanting to, create or put anything or even play, I'll usually tap into another part of my life. So I do have a tendency to compartmentalize my life. There are literally things that I don't really share with a lot of people that are just kind of for me and sacred. And so then I'll just engage with that. And for me, it has always, the dots have always connected
Mm.
down the road. It's
Yeah.
really interesting. I'll be doing something that someone might not perceive at all to be related to any type of discipline of art. But when I finally get back to creating, I'm like, it for me adds up.
For sure. No, that's beautiful. Okay, so we are getting close to time. So yes, this is be a beautiful time to promote. What can we expect? What should we be looking for from you?
I would say the number one plug I want to put out there is Artist X Advocacy is my mentorship program that I've been working on within the Iowa Creative Incubator. And I have an amazing human being that I'm working with. She's getting ready to go to Drake in the fall. And so we've been collaborating on a public work as kind of the culmination of this 6-month mentorship program, which is an annual mentorship program. So each year I'll be working with like 1 to 3 mentees. Or over the course of that 6 months, we'll be, getting to know each other and doing workshops within the community. The goal is to kind of ease the kind of academic and social emotional transition from high school into either the mentees' first year in college or into an art or advocacy field of work. I developed the mentorship program just looking back on kind of my gap period after high school going into college, that there was very little support that I was connected to within my community. And I feel like that for individuals who are coming out of high school, if they have those connections, then it would definitely, increase their ability to create, to be connected to, you know, or, like a representative body of what they see about themselves within our community.
Sure.
And I also feel like there's so many creative individuals who often leave Iowa because they feel like they have to go somewhere else to make it, quote unquote.
Sure.
And I just don't want that to happen. So, you know, maybe that's a little selfish.
For sure. No, I'm right there with you. Okay, so I'm gonna say something about things I'm working on, and then I want to make sure the last words I say on this whole thing is my admiration and appreciation for you. So firstly, and you know this, that we've been working diligently and hard on our own projects that we've been working on, and it's nice to have another fellow of the incubator, the mainframe incubator, with me on this. And thank you for agreeing to do this with me, actually. And so I would like to first plug the Buxton Initiative. As you know, it's something I've been working really hard on and trying to get this thing off the ground. And, you know, this was the inaugural event. And so I want to thank you again for agreeing to do this. It truly means a lot to me. And also, I will have a show opening on June 11th at Olson Larson Gallery, the Guild Gallery. And then in late July, the 3rd of July, we'll be having a community engagement event also there. So everyone be looking out for that. You can find that on my Instagram page, cam_go. And then also go follow the Buxton Initiative. And then also follow Jill Wells at Jill Wells. And so yes, last but not least, again, thank you. This truly means the world to me, because you know what I'm trying to do. Thank you for being that first person to help me with this inaugural event to push the Buxton Initiative, but then also, you know, Ames Public Library, and I hope that the Buxton Initiative was able to provide you that platform that you felt seen and heard via it, and I'm happy that I was able to provide that for you too at the same time. Yeah, I'm just forever grateful for you, forever grateful for your work you're doing and the social practice that you have within our community. And I know that the community would be a loss if it didn't have you in it. So I want to thank you for being you and doing the things that you're doing. So yeah,
well, it was an honor and a privilege, Cameron. And Buxton Lives is crucially important. So I will always pray and spread the word, because I did not have this space or this platform growing up. And to have this now, I feel very welcomed, very accepted, very seen, very heard. And that's important as a human being in my community, to finally be able to feel that way. So this space, this is amazing. So thanks, Cam.
Oh, stop it. But yeah, so yes, thank everybody for being here and joining us on this conversation.
Thanks, Ames Public Library.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ames Public Library, for providing this platform and making this happen. This truly means a lot to me. For the record, we'll be having 2 more of these, so keep your eyes peeled. I'm excited about the other 2 female artists, Black artists that we have coming up in these next couple of months. So keep your eyes peeled at Buxton and Ames Public Library. It's gonna be great.